Yes, this meeting is being recorded. Did you hear that?
I did hear that loud and
Yeah,
clear.
that was kind of trippy. I guess they got to say that now. So we're going to go live right now. And there we go. Just like that. We are live. Welcome, everybody. Hash Church 3.0, episode 24 on June 6th of 2021. I'm just going to quickly go in and mute the link that's live, copy it, and paste it into the other YouTube room so everyone can come and play. And welcome, dude. Welcome to Dustin Powers in the house from Future 4200 website. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. The rest of the crew is late to the party, so it's just you and I, man. Really nice to meet you finally here on Hash Church, and I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about your website and kind of talking about how you started it and how it all kind of came to be, and just really much respect for what you've done. You know, it seemed like a lot of the websites, I don't want to say fell off, but kind of fell off when cannabis became more integrated into Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and still they like to play and shut down accounts. But you really pushed through with the chemistry and kind of brought this group of people that were still willing to stay together. I just didn't see it on IC Mag. I just didn't see it on some of the other websites that just, some of the hardcore stayed, but to me, the websites really crumbled compared to what they once were.
Yeah, absolutely. And none of them had a focus on the cannabis processing, and that was, those two things between social media, current social media platforms being a terrible repository for information, unsearchable. You got all this information in the comments that you'll never find again, which that pushed me right back into the forum mindset, and I started, investigating all the different cannabis forums, and I realized there's a huge gap. There's no cannabis processing forum. IC Mag, because I came up under Grey Wolf, so I knew all about IC Mag, but it's got one subcategory for processing, and that's it. There's no, there's no organization there. There's no detailed, like what we have on Future 4200 right now. So I just saw a giant hole and realized it was something that we needed to do.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that because I remember on Overgrow back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I got on there. It was Breeder Steve that was like, come on to Overgrow. I'm in the Shark Tank. And I was kind of like, the Shark Tank? What's the Shark Tank? Little did I know that's where all the trolls hung out. And that was like where people got into it. But I ended up into the main room. And I can't even remember what the main room was. Welcome, Dr. Mark. Just talking about Overgrow right now. And thank you for introducing Dustin and bringing him onto the show today. I really appreciate that. But yeah, Overgrow just had like a photo gallery, and that's where Bog and Gypsy and myself and High Grade and some other kind of key early people were just posting these. What we did back then was we went and bought $2,000 and $3,000 digital cameras. They were Sony CyberShots. They were like 2.2 megapixels. This was like 1999. And it was the beginning of digital photography. It was the beginning of being able to actually take a pretty decent shot. It's funny to think that 2.2 megapixels was a big thing. I definitely paid over $2,000 for that camera just in order to show hash porn. And so that's how I started my company on Overgrow, and I would post all these pictures. And this one forum on Overgrow, this one folder that we all were posting in was where everyone was. And so eventually Shebang, who started the website, contacted me and say, hey, listen, I want to get you a hash room. And it was certainly, it's just like you were saying, like unsearchable, one simple room, not really focusing on processing. But keep in mind, this was really the beginning days to where we would get to with your website eventually. And it was just like, it was kind of a love-hate relationship I had with it, because I went from going into this one room that had like 30,000 people in it into a room that nobody knew existed. And it was up to me to build up that room and bring other hash makers. It took years. But then at the same time, all that great information, how are you going to search it? How are you going to like organize the information and the data? I mean, honestly, it's very much like Hash Church for that matter, because Hash Church is unsearchable. There's gems on Hash Church. And if ever there's people that, maybe have no lives and just want to sit around and watch 10,000 hours of Hash Church, boy, is there a value in picking out the nuggets that have been said on this show, maybe we'll learn a little bit about that today from some of the things you share about, Future 4200, how it kind of came to be, and where it's at today.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Mark. Thank you for bringing me here, and thank you for all your contributions on the forum and everything you've done for cannabis. So appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm not on there enough because I realized the other day as I was trying to scroll through and catch up that I'm so behind, and it moves a million miles an hour, and it's so cool. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of tongue in cheek, kind of back and forth, but I mean, I think when you wade through, there's quite a bit of useful information, and I think again, you fill an unmet need that's out there, which is. And I think Hash Church is different though, Mark. It's kind of like, I think of Hash Church is kind of like, again, reporting back in between weeks of Future 4200, which is constantly happening, It's kind of like, to me, it's like 4200 is part of the natural continuum, that there's this dialogue, and the dialogue is constantly happening. And it was just like, so fortunate that I actually found a couple conversations there, because I think in my own education, in my own self-exploration, in trying to find out what are the best methods and processes, if you ever close your mind to learning, you're missing the ticket,
Yeah,
so just because I have all those plaques on the wall there, that doesn't mean that I know everything. And, I go there all the time and learn new stuff. And, you think that, oh my God, what is this guy doing on his phone? It's mostly 4200.
learning.
Just catching up. I love
Dude, I got my plaques.
Yeah, I mean, so we got a whole lot of bases to cover here. I completely agree with you. We have there's this issue with the internet, right, where people can act like idiots with very little repercussion. And I thought we had this figured out at the beginning, but as a forum moderator, administrator, it's impossible. It's impossible to make everybody happy. So we've taken as hands-off an approach as possible, and it has its pros and it has its cons, right? Like, I spend a lot of time on other technical forums, like whether it be carpentry or working on my tractors or in permaculture, yada, yada. And a lot of them are a lot more civil than our forum, but our forum gets a lot more done a lot quicker. So there's this give and take. And you're right, this form of communication that we're in right now on Hash Church, it definitely works well as a summary. Also, we're looking at each other face to face, so we're much more polite. Nobody's calling each other names. Nobody's being a troll, and that's a huge important thing. And there, there's all these different sides to the internet, and I don't think you can have a platform that does it all. It's just not. It doesn't work that way. So you're right. Being able to summarize after a week of nonsense with little gems in there, that's golden. So, and to talk about the formation a little bit, it came out of necessity. Like I said, I wasn't able to search Instagram, and that came up because I was working a consult job, and the customer asked me a question that I didn't quite know, but I knew that I had read like a week or two previous on Instagram. I said, give me a sec. Let me see if I can find that little gem. 10, 15 minutes later, I gave up. I was like, it's impossible. You can't search this at all. And I had the thought, wow, I wish there was a cannabis processing forum. Couple weeks looking, like I said, there wasn't anything, and I didn't have the technical skills to start a forum, so I just kind of let the idea slide. I said, well, that would be great someday if somebody did that. About 2 weeks later, I was working a booth with Cascade Botanicals. Sidco Cat invited me. She's one of the original skunk farmers. I had worked with her and JD and Joe Oakes at Farm Gold. Joe actually brought me on board there. I was working that booth with Cascade. Catherine was there, and her son Sidco was there. And at the end of the day, he said, hey, man, you should start a forum for cannabis processing. And we hadn't talked or anything. I said, wow, man, if that wasn't meant to be, I explained this whole story to him. And I said, look, I don't have the technical skills, but I have a bunch of ideas on how, if you do the technical side, we can get this populated immediately. And you know how you said it took you a couple years to get your new room rolling? I leveraged the power of Instagram to jumpstart the forum because we hit the ground running. We did a couple giveaways. I was in the process of downloading every single piece of scientific literature I could find on cannabis using LibGen, Sci-Hub. And then I would format the titles and then I'd categorize it. And I called it the data dump. And I used the data dump as incentive for people to come to the forum. I put up a post. I said, look, if you repost this, if you tag a couple of your friends, I'll give you the link to the data dump with all of this information. And it just hyperlinked people over to the forum. And that's where we initially stored it. So right off the bat, we had multiple thousand members just hit the ground running. And at the same time, I shared 2 different large scale techniques that I had developed. One of them was bucket tech. It was, if you got a shed and a bunch of mid to low quality cannabis, can you extract the cannabinoids for cheap and safe in your backyard and at scale? And yeah, you definitely can with ethanol and buckets and a washing machine. And so we had the full write-up SOP on that. And then at the same time, I had also developed a technique for remediation of myclobutanol from distillate. And the timing was such that California changed its laws, and all of a sudden all of the distillate had to be pesticide free. It was an overnight decision. So you had all these companies with millions of dollars of inventory laying around. I convinced one of them to let me come in. They paid for all the testing. We figured it out. And my deal with them was reciprocity on the IP. I said, look, you can take the IP, do whatever you want. I'm going to take the IP and do whatever we want. We can't hold each other back. We can't tell each other what to do. That's the deal. And they were stoked. I gave them like 3 days head start. So they were able to remediate all their stuff and sell it into a market that was void of distillate. And on my end, I wrote it all up into an SOP, and it was the third, prize for coming to Future 4200 this is where the pesticide remediation SOP will be hosted for free forever, so that we can make more clean, quality products throughout, because that kind of my underlying goal is.
What year was that, Dustin? Like what I'm just trying to place that on the calendar. When was that?
I should write these things down, but 2017, 2018, I think 2017.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe 17, 18, somewhere around there.
Okay, so it was right when that California reg kicked in, right?
Yes, whenever that is.
Okay.
Yes, so there's a hard set date in the sand right there. Whenever they change that, but I'm sure you could look that up.
Right. So immediately you just have this huge audience because there was this need. Oh my God, I got to remediate my distillate. How do I do that? I need an SOP. Bam, they go to Google, they find your thing, and they're hooked. They know that here's a resource when I have issues around whatever that I can kind of constantly go back to.
Yep.
So that's a great story, man.
How's it going, Mike?
What's up, Dustin?
Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. You too.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good. Yeah, no, as Dustin kind of mentioned, there was a couple of states that were coming online with the requirements to test pesticides. And, back in many of the states where medical, they would test for the cannabinoids, and some analytical labs would offer to test for the terpenoids, but very little regulatory requirements were required by the medical states. So there was a kind of unregulated industry, right? And
the timing was such that some of these labs were now getting the mass spectrometers that had the sensitivity and the library to say, oh my God, look what's in here. There's a whole bunch of crap in here, and we could do mass spec matches in our library that we unequivocally know, here's this compound, here's this compound, and here's this compound. So it was kind of like, both things, the regulation, but also the sophistication of the analytical instrumentation in the testing labs allowed these things to be found and quantified. And so again, going back to the usefulness of 4200 as a forum, it's like, well, if you need to understand about those techniques, sensitivity of those techniques, what kind of techniques are out there. I mean, if you know nothing about the field, you can do a deep dive on that forum and get all kinds of information, right, Dustin?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's like my first people that on your professional training on the forum, go read through as much of that as you can get through, and you have a huge jump start to if you don't know anything I got a job making hash in 2 weeks, what do I do? That's a great free resource for you.
Man, isn't that a funny, accurate statement? I got a job making hash next week and I don't know what to do. It's like, well, why the
That's
fuck
where we're
did
at
you
now, yeah.
apply for the job if you don't know what you're, and it's crazy to think.
Yeah, but I didn't know how to make pizza when I got my first pizza making job, right? Like a lot of people don't know what they're doing when they get their job. That's kind of life, right? So, and in a normal world, you'd be able to go and sweep the floor for $1 an hour and learn by experience, as an apprentice or whatever. But in the real world,
That's
when a
what we
hash
do.
maker, yeah, and that's how it should be. That's
Yeah, we
if you don't
train
have
the
any
techs.
skills.
Look,
Yeah,
the industry has been plucked clean. I mean, let's be real. The good ones have
There
already
you
been
go.
paid for. They're taken away. So people
Oh,
are going to
yeah.
fake the funk. People are going to lie what they have to do. But they do this in everyday jobs all the time. You know, early on, I didn't know what I was doing, and I had to figure out things. There was no rule books on how to, run a dispensary or any of that. So, we just grabbed it by the seat of the pants. So, now there's rules, as we say. Before, we were building a plane while flying it. Now you've got runways, you've got engines, you can take off, you can do all these different things. So plan it before you start it and try to do as best as you can. But, a lot of these businesses and jobs are new. So, getting in there and fitting in and trying to figure it out is real world. So, Dustin's not wrong.
No, I definitely agree. At the same time, I got to say, and shout out to all my techs that we've trained over the last year at Embark. These guys came in with very little knowledge, most of them, and they have learned to have, if you teach people the right way and the correct SOPs and the right pathways to the results that you're looking for, it's incredible how fast people can really kind of, and I'm talking mostly solventless right now, but I'm sure it will be the same when Mike starts training people on his side of the lab. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. Shout out to the new hash makers that are coming on. I definitely remember the days where I knew nothing. Thank God I got lucky and got to stand on the shoulders of some pretty amazing giants.
Well, people prefer people that have little to no experience, because those who have experience will want to do things their own way. Whereas those that have SOPs, they will follow them to a T, which is what you need and have to do. So, we're all about breaking the rules, but know the rules before you break the rules is all I'm saying.
You got to strike a certain balance. You have to be able to do something unique and something expressive that you could put your own individual creativity into. But you're absolutely right. You're probably going to have to follow a set of SOPs that you may not think is the best way of doing things, but regulation and the rest of your company requires you to do it. And it becomes really terrible when you have belligerent employees that think that they know how to do it and end up either wasting a whole bunch of product or contaminating a whole bunch of stuff, and then you have to go see. That's why you don't do that.
Yeah, that's the worst.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to welcome everyone else to the room. Welcome to Etienne Fontaine, who I just spoke over. Apologies for that. Welcome to Johnny fucking B with the Save the Terps hat on. Crazy bastard that he is. Love him, love him. Welcome to Mike West. Welcome to Mr. Vessel Life. Colin Palmer's in the house. And dude, you came in with such a serious face, Colin. It's what made me laugh. I was like, I looked around.
Hash church.
You were like,
I was looking at something on my screen really intently. I was like, what is that?
That's
and
awesome.
that's my mind's churning look.
Totally. I saw it. I caught it.
Good to see you guys. How's everyone doing? Nice to see we got Future 4200 Dustin. What's going on, brother? Nice to meet you in the internet fashion. Mark, everyone, Johnny B, of course. Thanks for having me, Marcus. And, I'm en route to California this week, so if anyone is around, I will be there.
So am I.
Nice. I'll be LA first, and then San Francisco second. So I'll be there until Friday.
I'm going to San Francisco first and LA second.
Which day which day are we? Yeah. Which day are we crossing?
Wednesday we're driving down.
So LA, let me ask you guys a question because I've never been there, but I did watch the movie, The Money Tree. I don't know if any of you have ever seen The Money Tree, but it's an incredible movie. And Buddy says, he says, what's LA like? And he says, oh, LA is like a big submarine sandwich when you're really, really hungry. And you start eating it, and you're just starving. But then you realize there's like a big piece of shit in the middle of the sandwich. But you're so hungry, you just eat around it. Is that what LA is like?
Yeah, pretty much. I've lived in LA, you know. I've also lived in the good spots with Todd back when he was in Bel Air and stuff like that. So I'm kind of biased in having the nice places to stay. But I've been to there's lots of shitty places around. But you know, it's like pockets. You know, it's like anywhere else.
Very
You know, there's
affluent areas surrounded by the barrio, with the
it's a
desert on one
megalopolis.
side and the ocean on the other. You know,
There's
it's
more shit than sandwich for sure.
Oh, shit.
For
eh?
sure.
I
For
kind
sure.
of take
we're
it
gonna
like
get
you
people
take all
mad,
the
man.
all the neighborhoods in New York City, like East New York, like the far-reaching corners of the Bronx, and you just put them in the middle of the city. That's kind of the deal with LA. And you can't cross the city without going through those neighborhoods. So it'll never ever really change without that changing as well.
So then,
So they
like
need
the
to have a
nicer
better program.
areas, the nicer areas in which Etienne was talking about, I guess there's more bread there, because if you have more bread in a shit sandwich, you eat less shit.
Yeah.
Is that how it works?
Lots
And
of
listen,
condiments,
I love
lots
East
of
New York
mustard.
and the Bronx, so don't get me wrong there.
Yeah, but you're talking about Universal City, Hollywood, Beverly Hills. You're talking about some of the most affluent areas of the United States.
Where they have more
Yeah.
bread.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not a
right.
thing without-
You got more-
Without
They
the-
might even have a little cheese over there.
you got a little dough.
Spread that shit a little thin.
Yeah, so yeah, it's pretty much shit. Good to avoid. San Francisco is also shit. There's maps that'll tell you how much shit and where it is to avoid it, like literally. So it's gotten weird down there.
But there's great places too. Don't get me wrong. It's just, you know, it's a megalopolis. So you've got the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you know, there's more bad and ugly than there are good.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to hang out up here in BC for a little while longer, I guess, and enjoy my interactions through the internet until, well, it sounds like people are starting to make trips. It sounds like
Right.
stuff is, maybe we'll be able to hug people here
I
soon
think
enough.
June
Like, is this-
21st, they said was some date that they're going to make some proclamation on whether or not Americans can go back to Canada. Right? Is that right? June
Excellent.
21st. Has anyone else heard that?
It's like in New York, the Juneteenth, where you get the sun lines perfectly up with the avenues, so you can get this incredible shot all the way down or view.
That's what's up.
Berkeley Hinge.
So they'll let me come back to Canada as long as I identify as vaccinated, right?
I think the way it goes is
I
if
don't
you
think we're
get
doing
out
that,
there,
are we?
You can't come back.
Identify, yeah.
Canada currently requires a 2-week quarantine. That's $5,000 in a hotel. But I believe that they're discussing it, and if both sides of the border are starting to show herd immunity, they'll start looking at opening up the border. The big issue is obviously both countries want to minimize the risk of variant transmission. So what we don't.
Can we only quarantine in like $300 a night hotels? Is that what they're saying? That's baller.
I think it's the 14-day minimum. They test you on the first day and test you on the 10th day. But I believe if there's a certain target, if 70% of the population has their first shot, then they're going to probably allow vaccinated people to cross the border. But it's, as with anything, there's many great plagues throughout history were spread due to travel. But as long as you're traveling in a safe and smart fashion and not traveling when you're sick, there's ways to minimize that risk.
And what,
The
I
only
just got to
thing-
show them my little piece of paper?
Hopefully.
Probably, yeah. Probably. We'll see.
Yeah,
Let's hope not. Let's hope not. Although that little piece of paper looks pretty easy to create. Why don't you just put that on the Xerox machine and put Dustin's name on that?
I'm ready, man. I'm ready. I'm
Full
coming.
disclosure,
Marcus.
That's a
It's
felony in the
spend a
United
weekend-
States.
I'm gonna spend a weekend with Marcus, man. world will never be the same. And we're just going to show up on Hash Church one day, and it'll just be me and Marcus sitting next to each other, right?
And Mike
I
too.
might join you.
And Mike, yeah, too. Yeah, without any
Oh, let me know.
masks.
Hey, I got my piece of paper. We're good to go.
Let's go. I'm ready.
Nice. You guys got the
I got
papers. They
mine,
gotta
too.
open up the
Okay.
borders soon. They gotta.
Right.
Well, they're supposed to open up California on June 15th, but OSHA has made us aware that even though the state is opening up, there will be no new information for employees until July 31st. So it's still masks on in the real world for working it and doing it, unfortunately. So
Washington
still in
opened
it.
back up. We open back up. I think the 30th is the day they're going to get rid of all COVID restrictions on the 30th of this month. Although they said they're going to maintain the state of emergency, which gives the governor a whole bunch of like extra constitutional powers, which is strange. But currently they lifted the mask mandate, and there's no more restrictions. Now, some of the denser populated, like Seattle, people are still wearing masks, and most of the businesses are requiring masks. Where I live out in rural Washington on the coast, no masks, no restrictions. Life is back to normal. Not that it ever really left normal, but now it's actually like fully normal.
The only thing I really want people to do here is hash. So no masks, but hash. You got to do hash, man. You can't be coming onto Hash Church and not doing hash. So come on.
There we go.
everybody. We got our pipes. Here's a pipe. Actually, I think I might hit this little crazy Ewok one. This is fun right here.
That is nice, little slurper.
Yeah, good little slurper. You know, I've got my OG slurper from JP, and you can really see the
Ooh, the
difference.
length.
Yeah, in the
Yeah.
length. This one really is much more like that. What do you call it there, Mike? The rising film evaporator style.
Yeah, that's my first thought, that the path there is getting long. You get
Yeah,
good
that's what they
separation.
based it on for sure. That seems to be where they're going with it. You know, let's create a longer,
Yeah.
thinner tube, not a wider,
Oh.
shorter tube.
They need a vacuum jacket, that little part right there. That'd be sweet.
Get it all jacketed up. Yeah, so you get your little
Yeah.
marbles in there. There's 3 of them in there. And hit a little 6-star. Looks like Johnny B's torching up.
I was going to ask Dustin just about some of the controversy we hear about Delta 8. What's going on that whole thread on
Okay,
4200, man? It's pretty big and pretty controversial topic. And I just want
Yeah,
to
we
throw
got-
that out there for discussion.
Okay. Yep. I knew this one was coming. I've been thinking about it a lot and trying to follow along. You know, like I think a lot of people assume that I'm like fully aware of everything that goes on in the forum. Impossible. No person, that's impossible. Like I have a light, like I okay, so Delta 8. We'll just start.
So
A bunch of
let's,
people are making.
yeah, let's start with kind of how why people started making it, right?
Okay, we're gonna start at the beginning. Back in the day, we were running the short path, making distillate. It was coming out orange, yellow. Most of our short paths were like cheap Chinese glass you got on Amazon because nobody was making it. We were just piecing together chemistry sets. People were throwing all sorts of crazy ideas out there. One of them, which this is how Photon Noir broke into the scene. He said, look, if you take, he sold this as an SOP, but it's fully open now. If you take an activated bleaching clay, which is just like clay that's been acid washed, or certain types of silica like filter sands, all of these various medias, you can throw them into the boiling flask and the distillate that comes out will be basically water clear. Not wrong. It's great. Fantastic. And this is before, we talked earlier about testing and the ubiquity of testing and the how advanced these labs were. This is way before any of that. This is when the labs were testing cannabinoid content of flowers. Maybe they'll test cannabinoid content of your extracts. In Washington, it was a little better than other states. But so you throw these things in there, it makes water clear. But one thing we didn't know, because without the testing and when you're just making a bunch of carts to send off wherever, you're not testing every single bit. What was happening is you're greatly reducing your Delta 9 content, and you were also greatly increasing bunch of other random peaks all over. You're making like a dirty mess of distillate. One of those peaks we've now realized, the 8, and this is something that's been known for a long time, but the labs just finally caught up to what these scientists had back in the 60s and 70s. So we were making Delta 8 on accident, making really nice looking carts. Move forward quite a few years. We've refined the technique through analytics back in. We got really high quality D8 to get that last little Delta 9 out. And there's a bunch of really shady ways you can make Delta 8, and doing it that way leaves the possibility of having all sorts of nasties left in your distillate, anywhere from like the reagent that you used or the catalyst that you use is something dangerous or radioactive or super toxic, like, and you might have left that in there, or it could have also caused all sorts of weird side reactions. Like we converted the Delta 9 into God knows what, one of those cannabinoids that in the literature says it killed the rats immediately. Like who knows, there's all these weird shit that could happen. But that didn't stop anybody. And for years they did that and sold it. And as far as we know, nobody like died. There's no chronic outbreak of everybody died from this batch of distillate. Now that doesn't mean that it's safe. Who knows if those people are going to get cancer and die in 30 years or not. You know, we don't know that about smoking vape pens either. Like those might give you cancer and kill you in 30 years too. Point is, when a member, Ion Trap, said everything out there is got dangerous side compounds, cyclohexanes, all these different toxic things. My testing has showed this, this, and this. And except for this one lab, I found this one random pen that's safe and it's clean. And all of the ones I tested and yada, yada. And everybody's like, wow, this is crazy. A bunch of people jumped on it. A bunch of people were like, well, maybe that's a little weird. Roll back a couple of years. A lab that got involved with us, KCA, they have been active on the forum for a long time. They're out in Kentucky. They've been always upfront about everything they're doing. They sponsor competitions within us. They talk, they improve their procedures based on what we say. They hopped in and said, oh, that's interesting. We want to test a bunch of different samples. We want to see if that's the case. And then at that same time, when they crowdsource this big funding or this big testing campaign, and they run through it and they get all these random samples from all over the place. It comes out that Ion Trap is a member of that company or works for that company that was the one clean one. And a bunch of other people start asking questions, and it turns into this 1,000-long comment thread of he said, she said, what's going on here? Who's the scammer? KCA comes back and finds none of any of that in multiple different, all of them. None of them had those impurities in it, and they run another round and same thing. So it turns out that people aren't making super dangerous Delta 8. Delta 8, while still most of it is hot with Delta 9 because it's a very difficult process to get that last little Delta 9 out, we have yet to find a random sample that has any of these super toxic compounds. Now you can take like a palladium conversion. No, that's CBN. A PTSA, a fairly toxic acid. If you left a bunch of that in there, it would be no bueno and be pretty easy to identify, but people are not doing that. So, we are seeing pretty decent, like, Whoop grade chemistry here on this Delta 8 thing. It's unfortunate what's happening on the regulatory side because of the implication that it could be unsafe, or whatever it is that our federal government has up its ass about cannabinoids. It's coming through on D8, and not only does that ruin the potential for D8 for its truly medicinal value, which is that it's strongly antiemetic. It's almost absolutely antiemetic, and that's super important for children that are getting chemotherapy, right? The way that people die when they're getting chemo a lot of time is that they're not able to feed themselves. They're not able to hold down nutrients. And with Delta 8, you can completely eliminate that problem. And then the second problem with the regulation that's coming about from this fear campaign, basically, is that it starts to affect all the other cannabinoids that have medicinal benefits. We're looking at now, are we going to still be able to make CBN because of the interim D8 that perhaps gets made, or are conversions going to be, they're going to synthetic chemistry of cannabis and you can't do it anymore. It's like, so this D8 thing is a wild ride for sure.
It just killed a bill alone in Texas because they added Delta 8 to the hemp bill. And I've got friends in Texas who have been working on it, and that sank that one quicker than anything. It was the fastest torpedo. So the individual cannabinoid firing and misfiring is going to be a problem. It's going to be a cannabinoid whack-a-mole situation until legalization and compounds. Don't you think, Dr. Skeldown?
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't have a problem with the molecule itself. The molecule is cannabinoid, so it's safe, meaning that humans can take a lot of it. It's not going to shut down your breathing. You can't OD by taking delta 8, but I guess, you know, whether those results are real or not, what it does call for is production under some type of regulated environment, because it's no longer an extract. It's no longer, well, it's kind of like hash or, I mean, no, it's not like extracted anymore. It's basically the product of a chemical reaction. And a product of a chemical reaction, yeah, as Dustin points out, could, depending on how you run that chemical reaction, could have a lot of different products there. Marcus, can you let me share my screen so we can go through some literature I pulled up here so we can talk about this?
Absolutely.
Can I share my
Boom.
screen? So do I hit the share screen thing?
I think that's about it. That's it. Yeah.
That's it. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's see. Let's do screen.
And then
Share.
select which on your page. Yeah, you know.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the Mechoulam literature. You know, this is great, Dustin, because this is exactly what I had as a PhD chemist. I mean, I had not learned cannabinoid chemistry academically or in my graduate work or my postdoc work. I had to go and totally self-immerse myself into this literature. And here we find a paper from Rafi from, oh, this is beautiful. I think the title of this paper is Hashish. He's got like, I think he's got like there's a series of like 4 of these where just the chemistry of hashish. And look, this is from 1966. I'll bet you half of our viewing audience wasn't even born yet, right? So look at what he describes here. So he describes here, this is like the first time that I'm seeing this in the literature, where he shows the conversion of CBD right here over into, well, here's delta 8, and he's got an arrow going to delta 8, but he also has an arrow going to delta 9. And so I think he recognized right away is that you can use acid catalyzed cyclization chemistry to cyclize. And here's even something cooler for me. Look what he did after he cyclized it. He hydrogenated it and made hexahydrocannabinol. This, I think, is one of the first reports of hexahydrocannabinol here. And you can see it gives both a mixture of both up and down. So this is from 1966. This is from earlier in the year. Later that year, when his article published in the Journal of the American Chemical Society, he entitled it Concerning the Isomerization of Delta 1 to Delta 1,6. That's the old nomenclature. That would be Delta 9 to Delta 8 these days by our nomenclature. And what you see here is that, yes, he does have a procedure that uses things like sulfonic acids to basically isomerize this, which is Delta 9, into Delta 8, because Delta 8 is more thermodynamically favored. But it's very interesting here because what you also see is you can see isomerization of other cannabinoids. In this case, this here is CBC, and CBC can isomerize over into this very peculiar, what's called iso-THC. And so where iso-THC rears its ugly head, this is a paper from much later. So this is from, this is called The Chemical Aspects of CBD. I know this paper by heart by Hanush and Mechoulam. And in this paper, he describes what happens when you take CBD and you treat it with acid. Yes, you can and mostly make Delta 8 THC, but under certain acidic conditions, you can make other compounds, including this isomer of THC, which is called iso-THC. And in fact, this group of Italians last year published this wonderful paper on the conversion cannabidiol via acid catalyzed intramolecular cyclization to THC isomers. And so what you could see here is that, yes, they talk about, you know, conversion to Delta 9 and Delta 8, but they also show these 2 other isomers, right, which are formed in the reaction depending on the conditions. So depending on the conditions that you use, there's 2 double bonds and there's 2 hydroxyl groups. One pathway. Pathway A leads to these iso products, and pathway B leads to the normal products that you find in the plant, which are the THC configured materials, realizing that delta 9 is first made, and then under further acidic conditions, you just see isomerization to the more thermodynamically favored. This is where the plant ends, and the plant is able to do this chemistry because it's in a chiral enzymatic environment where these molecules are being made and expressed, not in a reaction flask. But this gives you an idea. So you start with CBD, and again, I think Dustin, you pointed out, because of the glut of CBD isolate on the market and the promise that this was going to be some big opportunity, people can now take CBD and convert it into THC and put it into products that get people really high because they have THC isomers in it. But what you can see here, if you look at this table, is that you get a plethora of different products in this reaction. And even if you take their best result here is right here, 93% delta 8 THC. Well, my question is, what's the other 7%? And in fact, they're quantifying the iso-THC isomers. So it's not the iso-THC isomers in this case. There's just 7% other stuff. So you have to assume that in that case, they're actually doing some kind of chromatography to clean it out, to turn that 93 into something like 98 or 99% plus. So you only have a very limited amount of what the unknown material is at. So if people can make delta 8, a cannabinoid, that pure, using that as another, as Marcus would say, another arrow in the quiver of being another cannabinoid that we can make. But look at the reaction conditions here. They're using a Lewis acid called TMS triflate. That's trimethylsilyl triflate. Oh man, that's not only a really nasty Lewis acid that you can't use at larger scale, that's something that's prohibitively expensive, and you would never use this in a commercial process. You would try to get away with some cheap acid like sulfuric or some acid that you can just throw away and not have to recover, but you would, and dichloromethane, a chlorinated solvent at -10, no fucking way, right? So when you look at, you could find a process by which you can make a pure cannabinoid, but the wonderful thing about this for researchers like myself is that they're forced to publish in peer-reviewed literature where they have to show their data. And let me just show you one quick thing. So y'all know that I love NMR. NMR is nuclear magnetic resonance. And what you're looking at right here is the proton spectrum for purified delta 9 THC. So this is what's great about 4200 and Hash Church and the literature, is that, you know, as cannabinoid scientists, we do have a crystal ball, and it's called the literature. And we could look into the literature and find things like this. So this is great for me because I can look at my spectra and I can compare it to this like a fingerprint and see like how clean something is or how unclean something is. And what I want to show you here is that, so this is the proton spectrum, and this peak right here, this one right here at about 6.3 corresponds to the vinylic proton that's right here. When you isomerize delta 9 over into delta 8, that proton shifts about, okay, here it is right here. It shifts from 6.3, it was over here, to about 5.4. So I can use NMR as a diagnostic tool to say, do I have delta 8? Do I have delta 9? Just like you can use HPLC. But what's even more important is, like, when you look at HPLC, especially if you have the sensitivity of like a mass spectrometer, you could find all of these trace compounds. And I want to just point out one more paper from Meshulam because I love this paper. In this paper, what he was doing was he was actually using a stoichiometric oxidation to make CBN. A lot of people are interested in CBN. He was using a dicyano-dichloroquinone, which is a really nasty oxidant reagent, to basically convert delta-9 THC into CBN. But I love what he says about the reaction, and you could just picture Rafi saying this because he's such a humble guy. Where is it? I'm looking for the quote exactly, but he basically says that, well, you can't use this method because it's a really toxic method. And the reason why I wanted to point that out is because, again, what you'll see on 4200 and you'll see on other forums is that, oh, there's a literature method to make this. There's a literature method to make this. What they don't realize is that these literature methods are not production processes to make pharmaceutical type compounds for human ingestion. These are to make little amounts of milligrams of stuff to put it into testing in mice and other types of pharmaceutical type testing before it's actually developed. And I think the good thing about 4200 when I see it is that there are a lot of people who are chiming in, and I can tell just from Ion Trap's what he's posting is, well, the guy's really knowledgeable. He's been in cannabinoid science for a long time. So I like having a dialogue with someone like that. But yeah, does he have a dog in the fight? You start reading through that thread and you're like, well, there is a clean, compliant way. In fact, Dustin, am I right? That's the title of the thread. The title of the thread is a clean, compliant way to make Delta-8. So the guy kind of has a dog in the fight. I don't have a dog in this fight. So, but I do agree with him that it's bogus that people who are flying below regulation, who aren't regulated in this industry, are basically selling a chemical reaction product that's no longer a cannabinoid extract and whose safety could, whether those things are in there or not, Dustin, I think the discussion that we're having right now is more important to make sure that you don't just say, okay, Delta-8 sucks. Delta-8 has to be regulated like Delta-9. Unfortunately, now, if they knock it off the Controlled Dangerous Substance Act, I mean, that's one of the biggest problems with Delta-8 is it's mentioned by name in the Controlled Dangerous Substance Act under Code 7370 as a tetrahydrocannabinol. End of fucking story. That puts it outside the provisions of the Farm Bill in my non-legal sense, but
yeah, well, the government really just put its foot in its mouth.
I'm going to get a drink of water. I'll be right back.
On that whole deal on one hand, they passed off regulation of hemp over, and that set this precedent. And then within that says, and all analogs of, within the hemp bill says that of CBD. And since I can get the D8 from CBD, that's why it's been allowed and spread so wide, because there is a legal discrepancy in Delta-8. Up until now, that states are giving specific exclusions to D8, but not the federal government. Those states are making these decisions, which is within the rights of a state for sure.
Isn't it true that people have been extracting THC and CBD from more hempy type products, but then they either separate the THC or they concentrate it so that instead of being 0.3%, it's more like 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 20, and they think it's somehow legal under the Farm Act.
Yeah, no, that's illegal.
So this distillate before remediated had about 4% by weight percent THC in it. Now it has no measurable amount of THC in it because it's gone through a process called remediation, which is a non-chromatographic process where they use heat to basically convert the THC over to CBN. And at some point, it's so funny, I wouldn't say it's funny, but everyone was like, oh man, CBN, man, there's actually genuine interest in CBN because CBN does have a lot of interesting properties. Everyone always thinks it's the sleep cannabinoid, but I could only find there's like one study in the literature, and it's like 20 years old. Yeah, so that's crystalline CBN. So most of the conventional knowledge, Sam, was that CBN was just some dark tarry stuff, but no, it's the white crystalline solid, as you know it is.
The first right, absolutely.
Right. And the other thing, so he's showing. So who's making that isolate right there, Dustin? You're muted.
We make this one at Future Compounds, which is our kind of compounding lab in Vegas.
That's CBN isolate.
You held up several tubes. One was dark colored. Which one was that?
This is the CBN distillate, and so this one.
Okay, I get it.
Yep. So this is like right after the conversion. It's still a distillate. It has not been washed yet either. We do several liquid to liquid separations throughout the process to add or extract various the reactants.
What's the percentage at that point of CBN purity in the distillate?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. It's only tared. I'm not involved
so
in the
white
production,
crystalline
but
stuff is easy to say 98, 99% pure. I mean,
99 plus, yeah.
White and crystalline like that.
Sure. Yep.
Do you have CBC?
Not in bulk currently.
Or CBCA?
Definitely not. Not yet.
So Sam, is CBC also a white solid?
Yes, you can, if you get it. CBCA, I believe, was. I don't remember with CBC.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think there is CBC isolate out there, is there?
I don't think
anything's possible.
Right.
He's not wrong.
Have the genetics caught up yet? Genetics or synthesis, that's how you're going to get it, right?
Right. I mean, the cheap way is with genetics. Once you've got a variety that produces CBD, if you don't have a THC problem with it, then it just gets mass produced until, the bubble pops.
Right. Well, I thought we were talking about this at Last Hash Church. There is some tech that talked about conversion of CBD to CBC.
No, Mark, I think it's CBG over to CBC.
Okay.
Well, me, I'm just a simple plant guy. The chemistry I leave to smarter folks like you folks.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not necessarily smarter, but it's a little more detailed. I mean, the cool thing is, again, so Dustin, was this some of the literature that you kind of started with here, the Meshulam stuff, or where did you, when you started your deep dive, where did you begin?
Oh, just in general? Yeah.
Yeah.
So first Google Scholar. And then of course, if you spend any time over there, you're going to come up with a bunch of Meshulam. And then I also purchased a book. I was at a bookstore in Seattle, and it is it's the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences, volume 191, issue 1, Marijuana Chemistry, Pharmacology, and Patterns of Social Use, December 1971. And it was it was the last time that they were going to meet and talk about cannabis. They were all shutting down all of their cannabis research because the government was no longer, that's when everything changed and they weren't allowed to do, research anymore. And so it was like just a dump of everything they had. And they're like, look, we're getting rid of this. We're moving on to other things. So here's everything that we know. And some of the things that I found really interesting in there was they had made every single different kind of cannabinoid they could theoretically come up with, right? They're throwing random shit at it. Oh, here's all these new ones. We'd isolated it down. And then they were taking that and feeding it to like dogs and feeding it, injecting it, smoking them in a little box, dogs and rats and monkeys and all sorts of stuff. And some of the cannabinoids that they listed in this book are wild and just killed the animals dead. No problem. Like, oh, they're dead. You could definitely overdose on that one. So that, and at that time we were doing pretty large scale, like this bucket tech, backyard ethanol, and then doing a crude, to crude and then distillation. And we just started getting photons, throw the bleaching clay into the boiling flask. And it right there when I read that, I was like, oh shit, what if I'm making something that's going to kill all these dumb monkeys? Like, that's not going to be good. So I went on.
It makes sense because again, when you treat these things with acid, I mean, THC in the Delta 9 configuration is only metastable. And converting over to Delta 8, you know, people were always under this misconception that Delta 8 is made in the plant. It's not made in the plant. The biosynthetic pathway ends at Delta 9 configured cannabinoids, and any conversion over to Delta 8 is just adventitious from humans fucking with it, right? So it's kind of like you get to the point where, well, okay, so what that means is over the millennia and humans using cannabis, people have consumed Delta 8. Delta 8 is a minor cannabinoid that's part of that gemisch. Yeah, it's a degradation component, but so are all those hydroxylated cannabinoids that El Soli keeps finding on his moldy weed, you know? So all those degradation components, are they really going to, you know, get you? If you look at it, actually, it's interesting. So if you look at those El Soli hydroxylated intermediates, they're all hydroxylated, which, by the way, is a hallmark of biological degradation, oxidation. They're all hydroxylated in and around that cyclohexane ring, right? Because it's trying to turn the thing into biofood or whatever. But ultimately, all those things are going to thermally eliminate to give CBN. So like you could smoke University of Mississippi's moldy weed with those hydroxylated things, but what you're going to get when you inhale that is CBN, because at nail temperature, those things are all going to thermally dehydrate and make CBN. So there's a.
I always said that CBN got me loaded, but it didn't get me high.
Yeah, there you go. Right, exactly. Loaded but not high. That's a good way to describe it. But like Sam, when those guys were discovering these new cannabinoids and saying, oh, look at all these, it's funny that those are only found on the cannabinoids or on the cannabis that they grow down at the University of Mississippi. So,
and that just changed, right? That just opened up. They just gave out multiple more licenses. Did Dr. Sue get one?
They did. I don't know. I hadn't been following that close enough. Maybe 18.
It changed like a week ago. The guy was on Joe, the founder of MAPS was on Joe Rogan, and he was talking about it as well. He got his license that they applied for in like 2001.
Dr. Sue is one of those that is
excellent. I knew she was top of the list. Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Sue who kind of blew the whistle on the fact that a lot of that cannabis was moldy.
She sued him. she sued
oh yeah, it caused a lot of controversy because people thought, oh, government weed must be fine, but as we know, because I tested it back in 2009 or 2010, and it failed molds and mildews.
My point more eloquently made is that even when the stuff goes moldy, those compounds are just fine and safe for humans.
Because, they're stable.
Yeah, who was the guy who got the can of joints every day, or what was his name?
Was patient one, but currently there's one patient, Irv Rosenfeld, out of Florida.
Right. So I mean, there's people who smoke that weed like it's no tomorrow, right? And
dude, he was loving it. We had a whole conversation with him, and it actually made me think a lot. Because of course, this is back when Todd was on the show. We're all like, dude, we got to get you better weed. We're going to figure this out. Like, you need better weed. And he was like, listen, guys, this weed is perfect for me. Like, it's just, I really quite enjoy it. And we were all just like.
I had a similar discussion with Robert Randall when he was still alive. And I said, well, if marijuana has all this great, benefits for glaucoma for you, then wouldn't hashish be even better? And he actually looked at me straight in the face and says, hashish doesn't have medical benefit. And I was quite shocked and quite surprised and didn't really want to argue with him, but yeah, that was his personal
Well,
belief.
you got to understand they have to sort of be representatives since they received medicine. They can't necessarily go out and shit on it completely. You know what I'm saying? I think
Well,
they.
no, I mean Robert. He's the one who stepped
Oh no, no,
out.
no, Robert. I'm just talking in Irvin Spence because I've had multiple conversations.
Oh yeah,
with
Irvin. Yes.
specifically. I'm not talking Robert. Robert, rest in peace. But although we do work with Alice, she's been assisting us veterans in all of our different filings and keeping us up to date. So yeah, the 20th anniversary of his death just passed on the 2nd.
Yeah.
So rest in peace,
the
Robert.
Shit really hit the fan. Okay, so he got it, and I think 8 or 10 or whatever other compassionate programs were available for cannabis from the government. But then he showed the AIDS community how to apply, and there were like 1,000 applications, and the federal government stopped the compassionate program altogether. But it grandmothered those 8 or whatever it was into the program for life.
And now it's down to 1.
Hey, Mark, that link I just posted into the chat is Mescaline 68, chloranil dehydrogenation of cannabinoids, total synthesis of cannabichromine. So it's he did CBC, and it looks like I think he starts it from THC, and then he goes from THC to CBN, and then from CBN to CBC, I believe.
Yeah, I've read every one of his papers. I'll have to admit, I've read several of his papers several times. Sometimes I go back and I read them again, just to read them again. I've read his papers so much I could hear him speaking as he's writing these things, and it's just the connection that we have with the chemical literature, which is just fantastic. And I think like what I always sensed from Hash Church, like in the early days when Horatio said, "Hey, Mark, you got to come on because Tony was talking bullshit." And he wanted me to set Tony straight. He's like, Tony's talking terpenes, man. Will you come on Hash Church and get this guy grounded on science? So yeah, I always knew that there was so much kind of like interest and kind of hunger from the community that wanted to know all of this stuff, like that Mescaline did back in the 60s and then Adams did back in the 30s, man. I mean, it is just really, to me, just fascinating because I think they knew the importance of the chemistry that they were doing. I think the thing that really made Adams's chemistry just kind of go away was World War II, right? I mean, he published like 13 papers in less than 3 years between 1939 and 1941. Then the World War II happened and they just kind of forgot about it. But, Mescaline, I think in his movie, he talks about this. He tried to write off for NIH funding in the early 60s to study the chemistry of the cannabis plant. And the NIH was like, go blow. Then after he reported Delta-9 isolated, they came over and smuggled the 10 grams that he had made back to Bethesda and did all kinds of secret government work in the NIH on it, where they came up with Axelrod's patent, on neuroprotection. And so like there's this whole secret agenda that the government had on cannabis while they were locking up hippies because Richard Nixon thought that smoking weed was the end of the United States, So, it even goes back further than that, back to the original reefer madness bullshit. But man, where we are today, think about where we are today. I mean, even in my lifetime, I was born in 62. I know Sam's got me beat by about 10 years, but we even go back just even half a century to where we are now, to where people are doing research, to where I just read this paper about MDMA to treat PTSD. I mean, it's fucking amazing, right? Where we are today in the use of, psychedelics and cannabinoids, and just a great place where we are right now. thanks to people like Marcus for putting Hash Church and you for putting 4200 together to educate the community, because a rising tide rises all boats.
I like to share the information. I like all the different discussions. It's, you know, for quite a while, Dragonfly Earth Medicine was in the chat kind of going like, fuck putting chemicals on shit, and like, no, that's the whole plant is better medicine. And I totally get that perspective. And I'm not like, I just find it super interesting, all of this information and taking apart the plant and learning about it and sort of expanding our knowledge on it. I do also see value in it, for the science alone, but also for specific sort of patients. Like, yeah, of course, listen, if you can get some beautifully living soil, organic, you know, fed whole plant medicine, or an extract through water extraction or something, yeah, that's amazing. But, you know, the example I always use is that the profiles change and that they're hard to reformulate if you don't do things like this. And there are, you know, like Haley, Haley's Comet, which John could speak of as well, that sometimes that would work. And then sometimes it wouldn't work, and it would just change the slightest little bit in maybe the grow room variable. And now her medicine no longer worked, and her seizures were are super serious. They're not lightweight seizures. These are like, you know, potential life ending critical style seizures. And so to be able to like find exactly what works for her, and then be able to just take plants apart, maybe multiple plants, to put that profile together, make it accurate, and be able to give that to her. Like, to me, I see a value in that. And I think I get where they're coming from. They're very passionate about that side. And I hope they come in later and share with us about that side. But you got to be careful when you're super passionate about one side, that you're not making a bunch of assumptions in repelling the other side. What Hash Church has taught me is to be more open. Like, am I dabbing on distillate right now? Like, no, I'm dabbing on 6-star bubble hash, and that's okay. But, you know, we've got to allow the conversation, at least amongst ourselves, to be able to discuss these things. And that's all I'll say about it.
Look, I like fresh rainwater straight from the spring. It's beautiful. But I also like pickles, and I have to take that water, mix it with pickles, do a process to end up with those pickles. Both are great. Doesn't mean I sometimes don't want water and sometimes I want pickle juice, but I had to go through the process, this fermentation or this salting process. This is life. This is what humans do. We take things and we play with it and we change it. And sometimes we end up with things like Delta 8 that might be beautiful medicine for a child getting chemo, right? Like, there are high use, like you said, you're never going to get the Delta 8 by growing the most headiest plant you ever grew. I'm a permaculturist, 100%. I want all of my weed that I'm going to consume to come from Dragonfly. Yes, that's great. But I might also take some of that and turn a little bit into D8. And if that means we can't be friends, then so be it. But it doesn't mean it's going to stop me from doing it.
For sure. Well, they're going to come in later. They're just really busy right now. So
great. We're excellent.
Yeah, they're good folks. They're the greatest
Absolutely.
of folks, really. They're just, I could feel his passion. I know also that their souls are absolutely being crushed right now by the last 2.7% of our rainforests in British Columbia. Our elder forests are getting cut down right now. So I'm hoping they're kind of going to come in as well and give an update on that, because it's pretty fucked up situation that's going on here in BC.
Yeah,
right
I want
now.
to talk about that too. But
Okay, go ahead, man.
So
Well,
I want to
Go ahead.
let's circle back on the trees too, because we have the same thing happening down here in Washington.
Absolutely.
There we go. Okay, so
Peace,
let
everybody.
me move. I'm trying to
You take it off, Colin?
Out of the way.
Yeah, I got to get going, boys. It was everyone. It was really nice to see you all. I'll catch you guys on the next show. I gotta get it ready to fly. So
Take care, Colin.
have a beautiful Sunday, everyone.
Peace out, brother.
Peace out, brother. Have a good day.
Yeah. So we got right here. It says CBG, Cannabigerol, and they label it as VII.
Yeah, that's
Goes
just
to
the
dehydrate.
structure.
Yeah, dehydrogenated with chloranil and benzene, which, like you were talking about, yuck. And then they explain how and why it ends up converting itself to cannabichromene, which they've labeled as VIII in a pretty decent yield, especially since we can now bulk grow CBG in the field. And here is you can just see the move. Here's VII. So CBG goes with chloranil in that benzene soup to
Yeah, so let's just talk about chloranil for a second. So this is a chlorinated aromatic that basically makes dioxin type compounds when it's consumed. I mean, again, if you're going to make this in a laboratory, it's one thing. If you're going to make this for human ingestion, got to be something just completely different. The other thing that I would worry about with this kind of thing is that, the reason why I pointed this out, Dustin, is just as an example. Here's literature where you could say, okay, there's a method out there. That's it. That's all I need to know, right? So a guy in a warehouse or in a garage would say, well, here's a method. What equipment do I need? Let's piece it together. Let's figure this shit out. He did it, so we can do it. I guess the other important thing, and again, I know Colin would agree with me that one of the big issues, I think, is not just necessarily the way that you're making this, but being able to have the intellectual capacity to understand that you need to develop a process for commercialization, run it several times. Whenever you run a commercial process, I think, Marcus, you'd probably agree with me, especially when it comes to stuff that's related to cannabis. So there's variables in it that sometimes subtly change. We can't tell with our naked eye, or it takes very sophisticated looking at many, many different properties to be able to reproduce a process time and time again to make for something that's going to go into people. Right. And so not only do you need the analytical controls, but you need to be able to run that process 4 and 5 times, look at the data and see what kind of spread you get. So like in a process like this, where it says, I don't know, 95% yield. Well, what if you run it again and next time it's 98? Or what if you run it next time it's 88? So you're going to have this constantly moving thing that you need to be able to standardize. And the thing that I really don't like about using a stoichiometric oxidant like this is it makes stoichiometric waste. In this case, it's chlorinated, halogenated chlorinated waste. Chlorinated phenols are the synthetic precursors to dioxins. So these things, if they haven't made dioxins, will go to a landfill and make dioxins in a landfill. This is just not good, not practical, would never be scaled up commercially today. That's
sure.
All.
And sorry, I got an echo. I'm not sure it's mine. So yeah, this is how we got to Delta 8, right? Oh, well, no, we got to Delta 8 on accident. But once we realized what we were doing, this is how we progressed Delta 8. We went into the literature, saw that they were doing crazy things with crazy solvents and acids that most of us can't even get our hands on. So that's step one. Most of these, and that's changing as these, like our future compounds lab, we now have access to quite a bit of stuff, but we never sold any of our intermediates and never would, because it's not safe. It needs a lot of cleanup. There's lots of processes. And yes, we obviously want to use the cheapest, safest solvents and acids possible. And that's always where we start and work in that direction.
Dustin, look what he says right here on this paragraph to the right. Work done by our group and others has shown that 1, which is Delta 9, can be readily isomerized to Delta 2 in the presence of paratoluene sulfonic acid and nearly
PTSA.
Quantitative yield. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
PTSA right there.
Whoa, that's it. They're off to the races. They're a chemist now, right?
Yep. And
we just made a chemist out of a bunch of people by listening to that.
Yep. There's the secret. There's the big giant secret right there. That's made a lot of people a lot of money in the last couple of years.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway, sorry to keep hijacking the conversation, Marcus.
This is a fun
Not at all,
paper.
man. I'm chatting in the chat room. You guys keep going. It's great.
Yeah, and you're right about the waste products, because you can get all of this to a safe spot. Now, could you do that, cost effectively? I don't know, but you can, wash, scrub, pass through chroma, get it to an isolated compound. Like we take this isolate that's at 99.8% or 99.9% in CBN isolate, right? There could have been lots of nasty shit happening before that now is not present in this, right? I mean, it's not radioactive. And besides that, at this purity, disregarding the idea that we're throwing away a bunch of nasty shit, or in theory, we're throwing a bunch of nasty shit. We actually have a pretty clean process for this CBN, but right, like some of these, like, and they go through, a lot of this, they get to an isolate point and then are checking it on NMR. That they say that at the beginning of this paper. That's how they've confirmed. So they're getting this stuff to some ultra purity, right?
Mhm.
That CBC that they made with this nasty process that they got to purity would, in theory, be safe to consume, right?
Yeah, but again, to use chromatography on the laboratory scale, where you're just,
Of course,
putting a
of course.
column
There's
together with 60 grams of silica, if you had to
Absolutely.
do that and make, several hundred kilos of material, it would be not only cost prohibitive, but I mean, the process chemistry and the equipment that you would need takes a substantial investment.
Of course. But now, and let's just compare it to pharmaceutical. There are certain drugs that are insanely expensive because the only way that they can get there, well, politics aside, the only way they can get there is through that investment that you said. It took so much money to scale up this entire thing that when we get this 1% of 1% yield, that's the magical medicine. Now, that may have gone through a nasty process to get there, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're discovering a medicine, there's usually two phases. There's a discovery. You do a lot of discovery and you try to find new structures and you make a lot of different compounds, basically assembling Legos in different ways. Then when you find your set of Legos, development. So you find out that not only has the biological activity you're looking for, but hopefully some sort of safety assessment or safety assessment on the metabolite. This is a pill, what's going to happen inside the body? And you look at a lot of different things when it comes to safety assessment, because again, a drug is not a food ingredient, but again, the pharmaceutical mantra is to certainly hook you for life and to make sure that you have to take this medicine for the rest of your life. I would assume that, again, the discovery phase can use all kinds of chemistry to get there to discover the molecule. But then the most important phase is the development phase, which is where you take that initial molecule or compound that's been discovered, and now think about how do we actually make a manufacturing process to make this. And we're not going to necessarily use the laboratory synthesis to make it, because the laboratory synthesis uses all this toxic, expensive crap that we can't use on the shit ton scale. And to make this drug, we need to make it on a shit ton scale. And we can't just create a bunch of, for every 1 pound of product, you create 20 pounds of waste. That doesn't work.
So Mark, when they're doing that process, before they go to the manufacturing scale, they've done their safety testing, right?
Well, typically you do
initial research,
you do lots